Hi once again, this is Watukovese. Today I'm going to be talking about the rook pawn as a strategy that one can follow. Um, uh, there are many hidden ideas that one has in some positions when one uses the rook pawn. And when I'm talking about the rook pawn, I mean the A or the H pawn. And the reason why the H pawn or the A pawn is so powerful is because if you think about it, you do not make weaknesses when you push the pawn. For an example, take a position if you play B4, for an example, no? Then you are weakening A4, and maybe in some positions you might weaken the C4 square as well. But if you play A4, you've got two pawns that are supporting this A pawn. You've got the B pawn and the C pawn. So if you play A4, you are not necessarily making any weaknesses, and A5 and so on. And the same with H4, or if you have black, A5, A4, or H5, H4. And this fact has been used by many strong players to improve their position. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. So first, we're going to be talking about the idea of pushing the rook pawn as a defensive idea. Because, of course, when you push the rook pawn, when you play A5 or A4, it's possible for you to play rook A3 or rook A6 if you have black. And you find that this rook can then be able to defend on the king side. Okay? Right, without much further ado, let us look at a very interesting game that was played between Gerald Hetnek against Anatoly Karpov. This game was played in 1992 in Baden-Baden. Karpov had the black pieces. D4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, yeah, Nimzo Indian. Queen c2, this is the so-called classical variation. The idea that white has is to be able to take back with the queen after bishop takes c3 so that he does not wreck the structure. Castles, knight f3, c5, and now Hetnek plays d takes c5. Knight a6, g3, knight takes c5, bishop g2. Right, so this is an interesting position. It's still early stages of the opening. Now Karpov, as a positional player, always liked to have something to play against whenever he was playing. So in this position, he sees the opportunity of when playing knight from c to e4. There are two possibilities that black has here. Either he's going to wreck the opponent's structure on the queen side after taking on c3, or if the opponent plays bishop d2, to stop this, he can play knight takes d2, and then he'll have the two bishops. So either way, he will have positionally something to play against. Okay, Hetnek castled. He plays knight takes c3, b takes c3, and bishop e7. So Karpov is happy with the results, the resulting position, because these pawns that Hetnek has here, the pawn on a2, c3, and c4 are isolated and thus weak. But of course, this is not the end of the story. The point is that, in chess, just like in life, you normally have some trade-off, no? If you have one disadvantage, there is another advantage. And here, white has got what we shall call a short-term plan. It means that white has got space, and white's pieces are very easy to move around. If you look at black's pieces, black has got a big problem with the rook on a8 and the bishop on c8. These pieces are not, it's not easy to get the pieces into the game, because obviously white has got this very strong bishop on g2, and if black tries to get the bishop into the game with, say, b6 or something like this, then, you know, when the knight moves, this diagonal is very uncomfortable for black. So Hetnek plays the move e4. It's a good move, a very aggressive move. He wants to play e5 to move the knight away from f6, and then he can try to attack on the king side. Karpov plays solidly d6, e5, d takes e5, knight takes e5, and queen c7. So he has to try and organize his pieces. Karpov, Karpov has to survive, so to speak, this stage of the game. If he survives this stage of the game, he will be able to win the end game, because this structure is much more solid than white structure, yeah, because Karpov has no weaknesses structurally, and Hetnek has got these three weak pawns. So Hetnek plays queen e2, and Karpov plays bishop d6, bishop f4, knight e8, rook b1. Yeah, this is a good move. We see that the rook and the bishop are coordinating, attacking the b7 square and pawn. So it's quite an uncomfortable position for black to find himself in. But let us see how Karpov is going to continue from this position. He plays the move f6. It's a good move. Knight d3, and then he takes a pawn. So he decides that, okay, his position is a bit passive, then it's better for him to actually, you know, have be ahead with the pawn. Okay, let's see how the game continues. Hetnek plays bishop takes d6, knight takes d6, rook b4. Very interesting move, because he wants to swing his pieces over to the king side. This rook on b4 is ready to move maybe to h4 or g4, and, you know, queen h5, and it's a very aggressive position, and he has many good chances. He has good chances to attack. Okay, Karpov plays queen c7. It's important for Karpov not to be too greedy, you know, because if queen takes c3, rook c1, and rook c7, this is not what he's looking for. The rook is on the 7th rank, and this is just too active. You know, white has got real initiative. Basically, if you're trying to understand what is happening in such a position, I'd advise you to go back and look at the videos I made on the games by Paul Murphy and Greco, where you will see that it's about initiative, where the material is not so important in such situations. Okay, so obviously Karpov does not take on c3. He plays queen c7. Hetnek plays knight f4, rook e8, and rook d1. All of Hetnek's pieces are in the game. The knight on f4 is very strong, ready to go maybe to h5, to jump into h5. The rook on d4, on b4 is strong, ready to swing over, or maybe even just play rook d4. The bishop on g2 is strong. The rook on d1 is strong. All the pieces are very strong. Let us look at black's position and see what is going on. Karpov has still managed to keep the position solid. There are no weaknesses in the position, but there's a big problem in black's position, and the problem is that the pieces are not in the game. The pieces that are not in the game is the bishop on c8 and the rook on a8. These two pieces are not participating in the game. So Karpov has to come up with an idea of how to get these pieces into the game. So now we're going to see in this game the use of the rook pawn as a defensive idea. So Karpov plays the move a5. A very strong move, because immediately, besides attacking the rook on b4, he opens up for the rook to move to a6. So after Hetnek plays rook d4, Karpov is able to play rook a6, defending the knight on d6. Okay. Hetnek plays queen h5. He's threatening, of course, to take the knight and then take the rook on d6. Karpov plays rook f8, g4. Yeah, Hetnek is really playing very aggressively, ready to attack on the king side. We see that he moves like g5 or h4, g5. in the air. And also when he plays g4, he opens up the third rank, which means that this rook maybe could come to d3 and then to h3. It's a dangerous position that a less skilled player than Karpov could have lost very quickly and easily here. But Karpov finds another very strong move here. He plays a4, a fantastic move. Notice that when the pawn now moves to, yes, the pawn moves first to a5 to allow the rook to go to a6. It now moves from a5 to a4. It means that the a5 square is now vacant. And this a5 square can be used by black's pieces, and mainly the rook. Rook a5 is something that Karpov is planning. Hednek plays c4. Now Karpov moves back, knight f7 first, and after h4, now he plays rook to a5, attacking the queen. Hednek must play g5. Now he plays rook f5. Notice that first of all, this rook has moved to a6. a5 first was the pawn move, rook a6, then a4, rook a5, rook f5, f4, knight is attacked. Hednek plays knight h3, and now g6. Queen e2, and it takes on g5. Now we see all of a sudden, look at the coordination that is all of a sudden coming along. Look at the rook on f8 and the rook on f5. They are coordinating nicely on this f file already. Yeah, so Karpov's plan is coming together nicely. He's able to defend quite easily. h5, king g7, bishop e4, rook goes to f6. And after queen g4, he finds a way to then coordinate these two pieces. Remember the pieces that were a problem, which was the rook on a8 and the bishop on c8. Karpov finds a beautiful way to coordinate these pieces by taking on h5, and after queen h5 playing rook h6, queen g4, rook h4, queen g2, and finally e5. Amazing how the rook has managed to improve the position, how Karpov managed to improve the position of the rook. He played a5, rook a6, then a4, rook a5, rook went to f5, rook went to f6, went to h6, went to h4, and then the bishop never moved at all. But after e5, all of a sudden these two pieces are coordinating nicely and they're taking the knight on h3. Rook d3, g4, f4, e takes f4, yeah, check, and queen f6. And roundabout here, Hednek resigned. We can actually see how powerful Karpov's position is here, and actually white is completely lost. A very, very nice game, and Karpov made this look very easy. You know, it was a very difficult defensive task, but he made it look very easy. So now we've learned how to use the a-pawn as a way to get our pieces into defensive positions. a5, a4, rook a6, sometimes rook a5. And remember, we have to be flexible. This idea we can use also when we're playing with the white pieces. It means we can play, if someone is trying to attack us on the king side, we can play the move a4 and then play rook a3 and then swing the rook over to defend on the king side, or a4, a5, rook a4 and swing the rook over to the king side. The next game that we're going to look at is a game that was played between Mashalek against Vasily Smyslov. Smyslov obviously was a world champion, former world champion. He actually played 3 matches against Mikhail Podvinnik. He won 1, lost 1, and drew the 3rd match. Very, very strong player. And here we're going to see him use the rook pawn in improving his position. Okay, this was played in 1961. Let us go into the game. e4, c6. This is the so-called Caro-Kann defense. Black is fighting against the pawn on e4, ready to play d5, d4, d5, knight c3, d takes e4, knight takes e4, knight d7, bishop c4, knight g, f6. Yeah, many games have happened like this. This is theory. Knight g5 is 6, queen e2, knight b6, because remember, in this position, white is already threatening some dangerous attacks. If black is careless and plays a move like, let's say, bishop e7, then white can already sacrifice on f7. Knight takes f7, king takes f7, and play queen takes e6 check, and and black will get mated. So obviously after queen e2, he plays knight b6 to protect e6 with the bishop. Yeah, and at the same time attacking the bishop on c4. Mashalek plays bishop b3, h6, moving the knight back, knight f3, and here we can actually say then here that the game starts. Now you'll notice in your games, yeah, around move 9, 10, sometimes after castling, sometimes just before you castle, that's when the critical moment of the game starts. And this is where you really have to focus and try to play, to analyze the position and find out what is going on in the position so that you are able to play very strong moves. Let us look at this position and let us take stock of what has happened here. Well, we know then that now black has a solid position, but it's passive because his pieces are behind pawns. His main problem, black, if we look at it, are these three pieces. The rook on a8, the bishop on c8, and the knight on b6. These pieces are not in the game at all. The knight on b6 is controlling only 6 squares. The bishop on c8 is not in the game, and the rook also not in the game. So these are it definitely is something that Smyslov will want to solve and try to find a plan. The next thing that we know is that this pawn on d4, remember we always talk about the opponent's strongest pawn. This is the strongest pawn that white has, the pawn on d4. Black must formulate a plan of attacking this pawn. So there are two possible plans here that black can play. Black can play for c5 or black can play for e5. If we look at this position and we look at how white's position are placed, white's pieces are placed, we immediately see that the push e5 is very difficult to carry out. So black will have to try and play the move c5 so that black is somehow attacking the center. Okay, so Smyslov finds a very nice way to solve this problem of the knight on b6. He plays the move a5 using the rook pawn. Before we explain this move and try to understand, let us say black has tried to solve the problem of the knight by playing the move knight d5. It's a fair move. Just put the knight in the center and we can then continue from there. Yeah, but obviously the problem with such a move is that if white is able to play the move c4, let's say white plays something like a3 first, so that there's no bishop b4 check. And if you make a normal move, then white plays the move c4. You see, somehow the knight has to move again. The knight doesn't have any squares. So when you when you put this knight on d5, you're not really solving the position of the knight. So let us see how a5 might help. Now you will see that this is a very cunning idea, because if the opponent, for an example, plays, so the threat is to play a4, of course. So if the opponent plays a4, now the square b4 has become a little bit soft. Okay, because that pawn is no longer going to be able to support the square b4 by moving to a3. And now it is possible maybe for black to play a move like knight d5. This is different from the first position, because now there will never be a move like c4. You know, c4 is not strong because the knight will sit on that beautiful square b4. As soon as c4 happens, b4 is a permanent weak square that the opponent can use. You know, so Smyslov could play a move like, let's say, knight b4, and this would be fine for him. All right. So we see now the use of the rook pawn as a way to get other pieces into the game, right? So the opponent plays the move a3 to make space for the bishop. And a3 is also a logical move because it's still taking away that b4 square from the knight, should the knight go to d5. But Smyslov has obviously anticipated this. He plays now the move a4. Now this is very interesting, pushing the pawn to a4, because when he pushes the pawn to a4, the square a5 all of a sudden becomes available. And this square a5, as we've seen in the Karpov game, it can be available for the rook later on, and sometimes for the queen. The queen can also move to a5 and then move over to the king side. So here in this position, Marshallek plays bishop a2, and Smyslov continues with his development. He plays bishop e7, bishop d2, and now he plays the move c5. He decides to attack in the center, because if he doesn't play this move, there is a danger that, because here, if you look at the two bishops, which bishop would you say is the better bishop? Well, it's obvious that this bishop is the better bishop. So white has possibilities of playing moves like bishop b4. Maybe not now, but nonetheless, this is a very big possibility to play such a move, bishop b4, and exchange the bishop, and try to then have some kind of an advantage. This explains why after bishop d2, Smyslov decides to play c5, attacking the strongest pawn. The opponent takes, and now he still does not forget that his knight is still out of the game, so he plays knight b7, wanting to take on c5 with the knight. Of course, if the knight takes on c5, the knight controls central squares, so the knight improves his position. Knight e5, knight takes c5, knight f3, knight e4. Okay, a couple of moves are made, and a couple will go quickly past this stage. They exchange a couple of pieces, and then Smyslov plays bishop c5, knight takes c5. So this is an endgame, and in the endgame, it's very important that you try to centralize, or rather activate your king. Actually, the rules of the endgame are such that the first piece that has to be activated is the queen, and then the rook, and then the king. So, okay, here in this position, it's clear that king e7 is very strong, because it means that the rook can go into the center. The opponent plays knight d2, rook d8, of course, knight takes a4, bishop d3, knight c5, castles long, takes. I want us to rush to this position. A very interesting position. Now, there is a simple rule about rooks, and the rule is very simple. It says that the rook becomes strong if it is able to have influence on the file and the rank at the same time. Okay, so for an example here, if Smyslov plays a move like rook d8, okay, maybe the opponent can play king d2, and yeah, it's a position, but it's not so easy, and he also has to be worried about this pawn on a4. It could, in some positions, become a weakness because it is in white's territory. Yeah, it's very far. But in this position, Smyslov uses that a5 square that he had opened for the rook. Remember that a5 move. First to solve the position of the knight on b6, then a4 to avail the a5 square for his pieces. He uses it to rook a5. Opponent plays rook e1. Now we'll touch a little bit of endgame technique here. What you try to do is that you want to create weaknesses in the opponent's position, because you want your king to be able to penetrate. That's why he plays rook g5. G3, and now rook h5. The h pawn must move, h4, and now rook f5. The f pawn must move. If white is stubborn and plays a move like, say, rook e2, then maybe you can play a move like rook f3. And after rook f3, the pawn is hanging. And let's say king d2. And maybe now I can play a move like king d6. It's a very curious position because white is tied down. White cannot move. If white moves the rook, white loses the f2 pawn. If white moves the king away, the d3 pawn is lost. And black will press with this king. His king is going to come forward, maybe push a few pawns, f5, e5, then king d4. No, black can improve his position very nicely here. So that's why after rook f5, Mashalek felt compelled to play the move f4. But now we all of a sudden see that after playing the move f4, notice that you know, the white squares are quite weak. You know, g4, f3, f5, all these squares are quite weak, and Smyslov wants to use the king to take advantage of this square. So king f6, rook e4, p5. There's a rule that we will touch upon later on about endgames. This was a rule that a player called Akiba Rubinstein mastered and showed, you know, us how to play with rook endgames. And the rule is such that if you think about this position, let's look at black's weak pawns, or pawns that are vulnerable, that could be attacked by white. We start with the pawn on a4, the pawn on b7, and maybe the pawn on f7. These are vulnerable pawns. They can be attacked by the opponent. Yeah. So the idea that Smyslov has here is that you must place your pieces in such a way that your rook protects all your weaknesses, or as many weaknesses as possible, which explains the move b5. Notice that the rook on f5 protects b5 and at the same time protects f7, and b5 protects a4. So now all of a sudden, not so many weaknesses anymore, and then we've got a clear plan. The king to move to f5 and then to g4. King d2, rook d5 attacking d3, king f5. And here it's just a simple question of tempo, and white resigned. You can calculate it for yourself to see how the game could have continued. I mean, for example, a move like b4, he will push b5, and maybe come back to stop this pawn. King there, push to g3, b6, come closer, king a6, push, b7, come closer with his king. And now white has got a problem, because if white plays king a7, black can play g1 queen, check, and then the rest is easy. So a very nice game by Smyslov, and we see now again the idea of using the rook pawn to improve one's position. Here a number of very interesting ideas were at play. Knight on b6 was out of the game, so the idea was how to get the knight into the game. Now you start to see that when you are trying to solve the problem of your pieces, you must use the whole board. All the pieces must play. So, for example, knight wants to go to d5, but then c4 is possible, so we play a5 first. So that if a4, then we can play knight d5, and maybe c4, knight b4. And if nothing happens, then he plays a3, and a5 is a square that was created for the rook or the queen. And in the end game, we actually saw that he actually manages to get the rook into the game by playing rook a5. Yeah, so another nice example of play, of improving the position of one's pieces and getting a plan by using the rook pawn. Right. So we are still going to continue with our discussion of the rook pawn, how one can use this pawn to improve one's position and get even other pieces that are not in the game into the game. This is a very, very important game in terms of technique. The player playing black played very nicely. So this game was played in 2014 between Ome a woman grandmaster from Germany against Vladimir Yepyshin. Yepyshin used to be Karpov's second, and I think he had a peak rating of 2660, something like this. So a very, very strong player and a very positional player. And in this game, he really plays a positional masterpiece. Let us get into the game and let's see what happened. So d4 was played. Yepyshin plays knight f6, and Ome plays knight c3. Okay, this is the so-called Veresov variation. It's normally played by players who either as a surprise weapon when players don't want to play too much into theory. And I can imagine why Ome would have wanted to play this position, this opening, because Yepyshin is a well-known theoretician, you know, someone who was working with Karpov. So, of course, she wants to run away from his very big theoretical knowledge. Okay, he plays d5, bishop g5, knight b d7. These are normal moves. Queen d3 is played, h6, bishop f4. Of course, when the bishop is on f4, the threat is to play knight b5. c7 is in trouble. c6 and knight f3. So immediately, as early as move 6, we have a so-called critical position. This position is critical because it is this position where you have to start thinking about making about your plans. Where are you going to place your pieces? Let us think why Yepyshin would have thought about his plans in this position. Well, we said that when we are talking about a plan that you need to follow, you need to attack the opponent's strongest pawn. This is the opponent's strongest pawn, the pawn on d4. What does it mean? It means that white has to play two moves in order for, Black has to play two moves in order to try and equalize or even get an advantage. The one move is c5 and the other move is e5. Now immediately we can see that e5 is going to be very difficult to carry out, and the move c5, well, there are a number of difficulties with c5. Let us get into them. You see, when you play c5, there are two things at play here. Number one, Yepyshin is not going to be happy with c5 because, number one, he has the black pieces, and having the black pieces immediately means that you are down a move. You are a tempo behind because white starts first. Okay, number one. So now you have already wasted a tempo because you play c6, and then later on you play c5. So in terms of trying to get an advantage, something should tell you that it's not really maybe the best. Maybe you can equalize, but it's going to be difficult for you to get an advantage playing like this. That's point number one. Point number two, when you make a move like c5, you are vacating the square c6, and you want to put more pressure on d4. But the problem is that your pieces are not placed in a way where you can put pressure on d4. Because after c5, generally you want your knight to be on c6. You want your knight to go to c6. But in this position, your knight is already on d7. That is a disadvantage because now it means that your knight is not participating in your trying to attack the opponent's strongest pawn. So we can imagine Yepyshin in this position being very uncomfortable and trying to say, well, how am I going to place my pieces? You see, many weaker players and even strong players, but who are not so strong positionally, they will play g6 or e6 without thinking and move their pieces, but later on they start having problems and start seeing that they cannot really coordinate their pieces nicely. But a strong player thinks immediately, how am I going to attack the opponent's strongest pawn? Is it going to be possible? Which move should I play? So this is not so easy. And Yepyshin comes up with a very nice plan. He plays the move a5. Here comes that rook pawn again. What is the idea here? Well, let's see. Yepyshin, remember, you cannot only think about what you want. You must also think what the opponent wants. So let's go back before the move a5, and we think, what does Ome want? What will she play? Maybe not immediately, but in a few moves' time. She also wants to attack the strongest pawn, of course. And the strongest pawn just so happens to be the pawn on d5. So what does that mean? It means that she also has two moves that she will play, either now or later. She can play c4 or she can play e4. c4 is difficult to play because the knight on c3. So it means she has to play e4. So Yepeshin knows this. So with this in mind, Yepeshin now plays the move a5. We will see why this is important. So the first thing is that if the opponent makes, because we can see after a5, the next plan is to play a4. To avail the a5, we've seen this idea already from Mashalek against Smyslov. But if white plays a4, now again, b4 is soft, and black can now play e6, and later on the bishop can go to b4. Yeah, for example, if white plays e4, maybe black can even consider playing this move to b4. This knight, if e5, knight e4 is quite nice. This is not so bad, and now black can think of playing moves like c5, castling c5, and yeah, this is fine. This is these pieces are starting to work together. So it means that, of course, after a5, a4 is not a good move. Obviously, Ome is a good player. She plays e4. She immediately decides to attack the strongest pawn. Okay. There are simple rules that we have to know. Space. When you don't have space, what does it mean? When you don't have space, it means that your opponent is controlling the center. Your pieces are, you are having difficulty to develop your pieces. What you need to do, obviously, is to exchange pieces, because your pieces are what is causing the problem for you. So, for an example here, Yepeshin doesn't have much space, so he exchanges this. He goes for this position. Notice that after all these pieces have cleared, this knight on c3 is being exchanged for this knight on d7. That is the whole point. Because after taking and then playing knight f6, you see, don't think about this knight having gone to f6. Just try to think about this knight exchanging with that knight. So obviously, it is black who's happy to exchange like this, yeah. So black takes on e4 and then plays knight f6. So now it means that the bishop can move into the game. Queen d3. Queen d3 is an important move. And now Yepeshin plays a4. Aha! What is the idea of this a4? Well, we have seen already when we've discussed this before. When he plays the move a4, he vacates the square a5. So let's make just an example. Let's say white plays bishop e2 for an example. Now I want to develop my bishop. But if I play e6, I have a problem in that when I play e6, my bishop on c8 is not getting into the game. This is not so nice. But on the other hand, if I try to solve the problem with my bishop, it's not so easy, because maybe 95, yeah, after bishop g4. My bishop would like to go to f5. So that's where we see now I can play queen a5 check maybe. And if, say, c3, and now maybe I can play bishop f5, you see. Now my pieces are out. And then I can play e6, and my bishop can also move into the game. So we see now a second idea of the move a4. We saw a5, and then now a4, vacating the square a5. So Ome plays the move knight e5. We understand why. She's blocking this idea of check and bishop f5. Yepeshin now plays a strange looking move, a3. This is a fantastic move. a3 means that, of course, she will not take here because the pawns become weak. I mean, if white takes here, yeah, then black can just play e6, and there's no way to defend this pawn without compromising your position. You'd have to go back to c1 with the bishop. This is obviously not good because it doesn't matter. Black will just develop and then double the rooks here on the a file and win the pawn anyway. So Omer decides to play the move b3, which is logical. Now, when the pawn is on a3 and we have this structure, the weak pawn is the one on a2. Well, let's not call it a weak pawn. Let's rather call it a target, right? So black is now targeting the pawn on a2. So we will see how it develops. I don't want to give too much away. You just enjoy the game and the technique that Yepeshin shows here. So Yepeshin plays e6, bishop e2. Now we're going to talk about another important part of chess, which is tactics. When we're talking about tactics, you are looking at the placement of the opponent's pieces. And now we've said that, you know, black is not unhappy to exchange pieces, some pieces, keep some pieces that are important. So now black sees that the pawn on d4, let us look at the patterns. The pawn on d4, the king on c1, and the pawn on c2. Do you see possibility of a pattern here? Yeah, because it means king e1, pawn d4, knight could go to be on c2. So for an example here, Yepeshin plays the move knight d5, and after bishop d2, knight b4. So for an example, if the opponent plays queen c3, then we have this move queen takes d4 already. Do you see? Using the pattern. If queen takes d4, then we can play knight takes c2 check and then take the queen, winning the pawn. So, okay, it means then after knight b4, Omer takes back, check, c3, bishop d6, castles. And now comes a very, what shall we call it? It's an interesting exchange, let's call it that. Because here, the immediate thought would be, okay, black has got two bishops, right? But black actually wants to attack these two pawns here. That is the big secret. Black wants to attack these two pawns, the pawn on a2 and the pawn on b3. And black is going to use the bishop on c8 to attack these two pawns. That is Yepeshin's idea. Okay, let's see what happens. Bishop takes e5 and exchanges the queens. Question is, why is Yepeshin going into this end game? The answer is very simple. You see, what he's playing against now is this pawn on e5, because the pawn on e5 is very advanced and yeah, let's see. Yeah, it will create some issues for white. So king e7, rook d1, rook d8, bishop d7, bishop e8, and now f6. Now this is when it starts. So now when after this move f6, there are two possibilities. The one possibility is that white takes on f6, as happened in the game. We're going to see what will happen. The second possibility is that white does nothing. But now, if white does nothing, black will take on e5, and after white takes back on e5, her pawn on e5 will then be weak. It's too advanced in black's territory, and there are no pieces that will support this pawn on e5. This is the problem that Omer is having. She decides to take, and now Yepeshin plays bishop f7. Do you see? Slowly, that plan is coming. Now we see the idea of attacking the pawns on a2 and b3 using this diagonal and more importantly using that bishop. King e3, rook takes, and now e5. This is very interesting because this variation doesn't work. For example, check, king e7, and to take on e5, black takes on b3. That's the whole point. You cannot play a takes b3 because of a2, and the pawn is running through. So now we see this is like an amazing a strategy, pushing the a pawn to a3 and then attacking the pawns on a2 and b3. So Ome plays c4 to stop this bishop b3, takes on e5. Bishop e6 stops rook d7, of course. G5 check. Okay. A number of moves, rook h8. So the main plan now that black has is to swap rooks, find a way to play the move b5 and then attack b3, and white will not be able to hold this position. So let us see. Right here, he plays b5. She must take. And now this new threat to these pawns is created. So now we just have to exchange the rooks. Rook f4. She tries to run, but now the rook is too strong on the 7th rank. Rook c2. It is exchanged. King e5. King d4. Unfortunately, this king cannot oppose the other king because now it is away from the pawn. You know, he would just take here and the pawn is running through. This is the problem. The rook pawn again makes its presence felt. So bishop c6, the king waltzes in. g3. This is called fixing a weakness. The pawn on g2 is now a fair game because the bishop is also on a white square. King e2, king e1, and bishop f5 check. And right about here, Ome resigned. She had enough. Because obviously, if she plays a move like king c1, we can see bishop d3 is coming. And this is just miserable for white. White will lose g2 and the pawn is marching through. Yeah, an amazing game where we see it's one of the most beautiful positional games that you can see, and this is a game worth memorizing just to understand the concept of pushing the rook pawn and creating play. And later on, we are going to see examples. I will repeat again. We need to be flexible. It's not only a5, a4, a3 that is possible. If you have white, a4, a5, a6, and if the opponent plays b6, the black pawns on a7 and b6 can be attacked. Or you can play it on the king side also, h4, h5, h6. And if the opponent plays g6, we will attack these two pawns, h7 and g6. If you have black, well, you can do it with the a pawn or with the h pawn, h5, h4, h3. And if white plays g3, then again we are going to attack these two black pawns on g3 and h2.